Hello everyone, I am Haunting Stories, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now, get comfortable and relax. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon winding through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels beneath heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold at bay. I was deep in the wilderness now, in the place I had chosen to spend a week, just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I had been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. Solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time, I was here to ice fish, maybe capture a few photos for my nature blog, but mostly I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it. The cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop beside a small frozen lake I had scouted on a map. It was miles from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just the way I liked it. Stepping out into the icy air, my breath fogged in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching toward the horizon where the trees blurred into an endless white. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. Grabbing my auger, I trudged onto the ice and began drilling a hole. The sharp bite of the blade echoed through the stillness, harsh and jarring against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it. A deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, gripping the auger tightly, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration, like the ice shifting far below the surface. I had heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sounds of a lake adjusting to the freeze, but this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost as if something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun had already begun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I had done this 100 times before, and the routine was comforting. But that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out over the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were beginning to appear in the clear sky above, bright and distant. Then I saw it. A light faintly flickering beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, perhaps moonlight hitting the surface at just the right angle. But as I watched, the light moved, slow and steady, as if something was drifting beneath the ice. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. It was still there, faint and rhythmic, like a lantern swaying in the depths below. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the lake. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment, then dimming again. Always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection from the sky. But deep down, I knew better. There was no one else out here. No one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing. The light, the sound. Something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced toward the hole I had drilled the day before. Something was off. There, by the edge of the hole, was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. The crack hadn't been there yesterday. It snaked out in an erratic line, as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the crack, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. Leaning closer, I peered into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the freezing water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine, but there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth, as if it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again. Louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice, closer than before. My pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound. It all pointed to something beneath the ice. Something unnatural. But what? The stories I had heard over the years about strange things lurking under frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice, came flooding back. I had always dismissed them as nonsense. Campfire stories meant to scare newcomers. But now, standing in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake. It looked abandoned, but there were fresh footprints in the snow leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing it open. Inside, an older man sat hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray. As I stepped in, he looked up at me with tired eyes. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice, and I saw a light last night moving beneath the surface. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake, abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there. Ever since, strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't. And that light, it's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window, as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV, but as I started the engine, the ground beneath me began to tremble. The rumbling was almost deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading from the center. And then in the distance, the surface exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I only caught a glimpse, something dark and enormous, sliding beneath the ice again, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But it was enough. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward as I raced away from the lake, the sound of cracking ice echoing behind me. The road was a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I drove, I could still feel it, the weight of something massive beneath the surface, watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, the rumbling stopped. But the memory of that thing beneath the ice stayed with me. I'll never forget it. The way the light pulsed, the way the ice cracked as if it were alive. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried, and whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet. I didn't become a park ranger to save the planet or protect wildlife. I did it because it was one of the few jobs where I didn't have to deal with people. That, and I was in dire need of a steady paycheck. In 2000, I landed myself a ranger position at Case National Forest in Louisiana. Far enough from the world to suit my preference, but close enough that I could make it into town for a beer. Not much happened out here, which is exactly how I liked it. Well, most days. Let's just say my luck ran out the morning a hunter, Clyde Murchison, radioed in about a missing buddy. Hunting accidents happen more often than we'd like to admit, but it wasn't the call that got to me. It was what he said next. Clyde mentioned they'd found something, but he couldn't even begin to describe what it was. He just said I needed to get down there fast. I figured it was a cougar attack. Those weren't unheard of out here. And I mentally braced myself for the usual gruesome scene. Mauled body, half-eaten carcass, the works. What I didn't expect was the bizarre scene that would soon make me question why the hell I ever thought this gig was a good idea. When I arrived at the location deep into the forest's southern section, Clyde was pacing back and forth near a dense thicket, his face as pale as death. There were 3 others with him, and none of them looked much better. One of the guys pointed shakily toward the trees and muttered that I needed to see for myself. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but when I spotted the remains of Clyde's friend Eddie, I felt my stomach turn. Eddie wasn't just mauled. He was torn apart in a way that I'd never seen before. Limbs ripped off, skin shredded like paper. It was too much damage for any cougar or bear, which was the first red flag. The second was the sheer brutality of the attack. This wasn't an animal trying to eat. It was something far worse. Clyde told me the story as best he could. They'd been tracking a buck, moving quietly through the woods, when Eddie suddenly went silent behind them. They turned around and he was gone, just like that. They heard noises, unnatural sounds, and when they finally found him, he was in pieces. And here's the kicker. They swore they hadn't heard anything before that. Not a single noise. That's what didn't sit right with me. The forest is never quiet. Something that could do this shouldn't have been able to sneak up on anyone. I radioed back to the station, calling for help, but I didn't mention the extent of the damage over the airwaves. I wasn't about to stir up a panic. Not yet. We decided to head back toward the station, the 4 hunters and me, keeping Eddie's body wrapped in a tarp for transport. The forest felt different, though. Something wasn't right. I'd spent enough time out here to know when the woods got too quiet, and at that moment, they were practically holding their breath. An hour into our trek back, Clyde was the first to hear it, a strange clicking noise. Not the kind insects make, but something deeper, like bones grinding together. It echoed through the trees, surrounding us. We stopped dead in our tracks, eyes scanning the woods. I had my hand on my sidearm, even though I wasn't sure what good it would do. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something I'd dealt with before. Clyde whispered that it was getting closer. One of the other hunters, a guy named Wendell, pointed toward a large pine tree and mouthed something I couldn't make out. I followed his gaze and saw it. A figure crouching low against the bark, its body almost blending in with the forest. At first glance, it looked like a deer, but not quite. It was wrong. Its limbs were elongated, bones jutting out unnaturally. The antlers were massive, but they weren't normal either. They twisted in ways that didn't make sense, almost as if they were a part of the creature's skull, fused together. Its fur was patchy, and its face was human-like. I blinked hard, trying to convince myself that I wasn't seeing what I thought I was seeing. But there it was, watching us. I'm not a religious man, but at that moment, I was praying to any deity that would listen. No animal I knew could move like that thing. Clyde had the same wide-eyed stare, and before I could even think about what to do next, the creature darted, not toward us, but around us, moving so fast it was a blur. I shouted for everyone to stay together, but Wendell broke off, running in the opposite direction. Within seconds, that thing was on him. I barely had time to draw my weapon before Wendell let out a scream that still haunts me. His body was yanked up into the air as if it weighed nothing, and in the next moment, he was gone. Just gone. There was no time to process. The others bolted, and I followed. My heart was hammering in my chest as we pushed through the brush. We didn't stop until we hit the creek that ran near the old ranger station. Clyde was panting so hard I thought he might collapse, but his face was still that same shade of pale. We didn't have time to rest. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't done with us. I could hear it in the distance, that awful clicking noise. It wasn't chasing anymore. No, it was stalking us. We made it to the station and slammed the door behind us, locking it. The building was old, though, and there wasn't much that could keep something like that out, if it really wanted in. Clyde was shaking. He kept muttering under his breath, swearing that we were all dead. I checked the radio again, but all I got was static. I thought about going for the emergency satellite phone, but it was in the supply shed, a good 50 yards from the main station. No one was volunteering to go back outside. The sounds outside intensified. Heavy footsteps circling the building, occasional scrapes against the windows. I couldn't bring myself to look. If I did, I was sure I'd see that thing staring back at me with that awful human-like face. Hours passed. We sat in terrified silence, guns ready. Not that I thought they'd do much good. Finally, the noises stopped. The forest went back to its normal hum of activity, and for a moment, I thought maybe the thing had moved on. Maybe we were safe. But Clyde wasn't buying it. He said he could feel it still out there, watching. And that's when I heard it. Not the creature, but something else. A voice. It came from the radio. A woman's voice crackling through the static. She was calling my name, telling me to meet her by the creek, saying she knew what was happening. I didn't recognize the voice, but it was enough to pull me to my feet. Clyde tried to stop me, but I was already halfway out the door before he could say anything. I needed answers, and whoever that was on the radio might have them. When I reached the creek, there was no woman waiting for me, only silence. I should have turned back then, but I didn't. Something drew me forward like I was being pulled along by an invisible string. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I moved deeper into the woods. And then I saw it. Wendell's body, or at least what was left of it. He was mangled beyond recognition, but I knew it was him. The creature had left him there, almost like it was mocking us. I should have run, but I didn't. I raised my gun, more out of instinct than anything, and that's when I saw movement in the trees ahead. The creature stepped out of the shadows, its long limbs hanging loosely by its sides, and it was smiling. I swear to God, that thing was smiling. It didn't charge, it didn't growl, it just stood there watching me. And I knew right then that I wasn't making it out of these woods alive. In one last desperate attempt, I fired. The bullets hit, but they didn't stop it. The creature staggered, its body twisting in unnatural ways, but it didn't go down. It didn't seem to feel pain the way a normal animal would. With a slow, deliberate movement, it started toward me. That's when Clyde came barreling out of nowhere, axe in hand. He swung at the creature with all his might, landing a blow that seemed to hit just the right spot. The creature let out this horrible, distorted noise before crumpling to the ground. We stood there, panting, staring at the thing's twisted form. It didn't move again. Clyde wiped the sweat from his brow and, in his typical dark humor fashion, muttered that if I ever asked him to go hunting again, he'd probably shoot me first. And that was the end of it. We dragged what was left of the creature back to the station, and when the authorities arrived, they didn't ask many questions. I'm guessing they didn't want answers any more than we did. All I know is I've decided I'm sticking to desk work from now on. The Brown Mountain Lights? They were just another mystery waiting for a rational explanation. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV up the winding roads of Pisgah National Forest. The thick trees closed in on either side. The air was crisp, and autumn leaves scattered across the path. There was a quiet stillness that made the world feel far away. I should have felt calm, excited even. But as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges, leaving the forest bathed in shadow, I felt something else. Tension. Shaking it off, I parked the RV at the remote campsite I had scouted. This was supposed to be a solo trip. A few days to get up close and personal with the Brown Mountain Lights, interview locals, take readings, and prove once and for all that the lights were nothing more than atmospheric conditions or optical illusions. I had all the gear I needed: high-resolution cameras, thermal scanners, EMF detectors, the works. I wasn't expecting to find anything supernatural, just an anomaly. And anomalies had explanations. But the moment I stepped out of the RV, a chill ran through me. The trees rustled softly, as if whispering some secret I wasn't meant to hear. "Focus," I muttered to myself, dragging my gear out and setting up the cameras, angling them toward Brown Mountain Ridge. I had a perfect view of the ridge from my campsite, miles away but clear in the distance. That's where the lights were supposed to appear. By the time I was fully settled in, I was sitting outside the RV, bundled in a jacket, sipping coffee, and staring out into the dark, waiting. The forest was eerily silent, no birds, no wind, nothing, just stillness. Then, around midnight, I saw them. At first, they were faint, flickering, small orbs of light hovering just above the ridge. I squinted, adjusting the focus on my binoculars. There they were. 3 lights bobbing in the air like they were floating on an invisible current. I grabbed my camera, flipping the switch to start recording, but nothing happened. The lens stayed black. The screen, dead. "What the hell?" I muttered, fiddling with the buttons. Fully charged and brand new, the camera shouldn't have malfunctioned. I checked the battery, clicked it back into place, and tried again. Still nothing. Frustration surged through me. This was exactly what I had come here for. The lights, right there in front of me, and I couldn't even capture them. I stood up, grabbing my thermal scanner, but when I flipped it on, the screen flickered and then went dark. "Come on," I whispered, trying to stay calm. The gear wasn't cheap, and none of it should have been failing, yet it was, piece by piece. The lights danced on the ridge, growing brighter, closer. My heart raced. I wasn't scared, I told myself, just annoyed. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it. Maybe the electronics were glitching due to interference, some kind of electromagnetic field or something. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. But the lights, those strange, pulsing orbs, kept moving, almost as if they were drifting toward me. I'm sticking to desk work from now on. The air turned cold, so cold that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. A thin layer of frost began forming on the ground, on the RV windows, on my gear. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands stiffening in the chill. It didn't make sense. The weather forecast had called for a cool night, but nothing like this. I checked my phone's temperature app. 30 degrees? Impossible. I glanced around, feeling the silence close in on me. Then I noticed the lights were no longer on the ridge. They were much closer now, floating just above the treetops, flickering like distant fireflies, but larger, too large. I watched, heart pounding, as they bobbed and weaved. Their glow cast long shadows on the ground. I pulled out my phone to take a video. The screen flashed, then went black. It wouldn't turn on. Frustration boiled over. I slammed the phone down on the camping table. It bounced. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. This was why people got sucked into believing nonsense, because technology failed at the worst possible moment. The lights weren't supernatural. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cold was affecting the equipment, or some kind of atmospheric distortion was at play. But then I saw the handprints. Small, faint handprints etched in frost on the RV window. They hadn't been there before. I knew that. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They looked like the handprints of a child, no more than a few inches across, and they were slowly, gradually melting away in the cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I turned to look at the lights, now hovering at the edge of the forest, close enough that I could make out their eerie bluish glow. They flickered in the trees, moving in slow, lazy circles as if they were watching me, waiting for me. The rational part of my mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no way the lights could have traveled that fast. No way they could be this close. I had seen videos, read reports. They were always distant, spectral, unreachable. But now they felt personal, beckoning me. I swallowed, my throat tight. Without thinking, I took a step forward. The cold deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. Frost crept up the sides of the RV, spreading like delicate veins. The temperature continued to drop. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred. The lights drifted deeper into the trees, flickering and glowing, moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, like they wanted me to follow. And I did. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I stepped toward the forest's edge. The beam was weak, barely cutting through the dark. I kept my eyes on the lights, feeling a strange pull in my chest, as if something were urging me forward. As I entered the trees, the world grew darker. The lights danced just out of reach, always a few steps ahead, their glow casting an ethereal shimmer on the twisted branches. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't even noticed. My legs ached, and a sinking realization hit me. I had no idea how far I had wandered. The lights flickered again, brightening as they circled a large boulder ahead. Then they stopped, hovering motionless. I stepped closer. And that's when the hallucinations began. Shapes, faint figures moving in the trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long. And there, between the branches, I saw faces. Pale, expressionless faces, staring at me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. Panic surged through me. I turned to leave, but the forest had shifted. The path I had taken was no longer clear. Everything looked the same trees, the same twisting branches. The lights pulsed behind me, glowing brighter, as if taunting me. I ran. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My heart pounded as I stumbled through the underbrush, desperately trying to find my way back to the campsite. The lights flickered at the edges of my vision. I ignored them. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick footsteps crunching through the frost behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, my flashlight flickering and then dying in my hand. I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, and saw the RV ahead. A welcome sight. But the air around it was colder than ever. The frost on the windows was so thick it looked like snow. And there, pressed against the glass, were more handprints. Dozens of them. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor, panting. My entire body trembled with cold and fear. The lights were still out there. I could see them through the frosted windows, flickering in the trees, growing fainter as the night wore on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, they were gone. The temperature returned to normal and the frost melted away. But I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I packed up the RV and drove out of Pisgah National Forest, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I had come here to find an explanation, to debunk the Brown Mountain lights. But what I found was something else, something I couldn't explain. And I knew, deep down, that the lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were something more, something ancient, something dangerous, something that had almost taken me. I don't know what they wanted, but I'll never go back to find out. The road ahead. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last. But something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call, or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert, as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70, heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive, needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister. Bones, to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter, Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit struggling, stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed. The kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the trailer, scanning for the source of the problem. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping. No, not tapping. Scratching. It was coming from the crate. A large wooden crate sat strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart pounded in my chest. The kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching grew louder. The crate shifted slightly, as if something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it. Not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B, no questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought. Some kind of government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, making me jump. Static filled the cab, and then, through the fuzz, I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. One of her favorites. "No," I muttered, switching the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days. That's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. At first, I thought they were just shadows, shapes in the mist, thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps. women in long, flowing dresses. Their faces were pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, keeping my eyes on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, was watching me, following me. Then the trailer lurched hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again. Then came the knocking. Loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding from inside the crate. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road, my hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes. But I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open. And then everything stopped. The wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, blackened with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse as if it were alive, breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirled in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out, one voice I knew. Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder, and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I had seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I saw them again. The figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar, faces I had seen on the road before, long-dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself had parted, I saw her. Carol, standing in the middle of the road. Her white dress flowed in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed, sliding across the desert sand. I barely managed to hold on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm had passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal, no way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again. Carol, walking slowly toward me. Her face was pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy?" she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting as the darkness closed in around me. There's a peace you find on the road late at night when the only thing lighting your way is your own headlights slicing through the dark. No noise, no distractions, just me, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of asphalt. That's why I love it out here. No mess, nothing like the life I left behind. Just the road. My name's Lucas Turner, but most folks call me Lucky. It's an old nickname from when I had a habit of getting myself out of sticky situations, that's both on and off the road. I suppose I've lived up to it, though I've never been one for superstition. If you stay calm and keep moving forward, things usually work out. But that night on Route 2, the nickname didn't feel so fitting anymore. I had left Seattle earlier that day, hauling a load of electronics to a distribution center in North Dakota. A long stretch of mostly empty highway lay between me and the drop-off, but I didn't mind. It was a quiet night, just the way I liked it. No cars, no people, just the stars overhead and the empty plains around me. The deeper I drove into Montana, the quieter it got. Nothing but the hum of my rig and the occasional flicker of static on the CB. But somewhere along that desolate stretch of US Route 2, the static changed. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It started to sound like something trying to break through, a faint voice hidden in the distortion. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear it up, but all I got was more static. After a few minutes, the voice faded, and I figured it was just some distant radio chatter from a passing trucker. I wasn't tired yet, but I was getting there. I hadn't slept much since the divorce, and nights like this, long and quiet, always gave me too much time to think. Sometimes you drive to outrun what's on your mind. The problem is, it's always waiting for you when you stop. Just as I was about to switch the CB off and turn up my music, the radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer, a low monotone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 752, it said, repeating the number slowly like it was reading coordinates. I grabbed the mic and keyed up. "This is Lucky Turner, eastbound on Route 2. You got a copy?" Nothing. Just static. Then the voice again, quieter this time. 752, you need to stop. I frowned, the words sending a chill through me. I hadn't heard anyone nearby on the CB all night, so where the hell was this coming from? I glanced at the GPS out of habit, but it showed nothing unusual, just the straight road ahead. I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease. About an hour later, the same numbers came through again. But this time it wasn't just numbers. Lucas. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road so fast the rig shuddered beneath me. The voice had said my name. I cut the engine, my heart racing. The radio was dead silent now, nothing but the low hum of static, like the voice had never been there at all. I rubbed my hands together, trying to calm down. It had to be some kind of weird signal bounce. Maybe from a nearby base, old military broadcasts or something. That happens sometimes out here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped out of the cab, needing to clear my head, and breathed in the cold, crisp night air. The road was empty, nothing but flat plains and dark woods on either side. No headlights, no signs of life. I walked around the truck, stretching my legs, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I glanced down the road, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another trucker, but the lights didn't seem to be moving. They just sat there. I watched for a minute, waiting for the truck to approach, but it never did. The lights stayed exactly where they were, flickering slightly in the dark. Something about them didn't feel right. It was like they were watching me. "Don't be an idiot, Lucky," I muttered to myself, climbing back into the cab. But as I settled into the driver's seat and fired up the engine again, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still there, even as I pulled away. I pushed the truck hard, wanting to put some distance between me and whatever was behind me. But the farther I drove, the more the radio interference grew. It was subtle at first, just little bursts of static. But then it got louder, and within that static, I could hear it again. "Lucas, 752. I checked the mirrors, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw the convoy. 3 trucks, old military rigs by the look of them. They were in a tight formation, following about 100 yards behind me. I hadn't passed them on the road, hadn't seen them pull out from anywhere. They were just there, like they had appeared out of nowhere. My grip tightened on the wheel. I had 2 options: stop and let them pass, or keep going and pretend nothing was wrong. My gut told me to keep going, but no matter how fast I drove, the trucks stayed right behind me, their headlights burning bright in the dark. And that voice, Eddie's voice, kept slipping through the static on the CB. "You need to stop, Lucas." I slammed my fist against the dashboard, adrenaline surging through me. This couldn't be real. Eddie was dead. Had been for years, yet his voice kept coming, clear as day, telling me to stop. I passed a small sign on the roadside. Deadwood Ridge, 2 miles. That's where the voice had been leading me. 7L52. It was a set of coordinates that pointed directly to Deadwood Ridge. I didn't want to go there. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to get as far away as possible. But Eddie's voice had a pull I couldn't shake. Something was waiting for me there, something I had to face. When the turnoff for Deadwood Ridge appeared, my hands moved before my mind could catch up. I took the exit. The old, narrow road wound through thick trees, and as soon as I turned, the convoy behind me vanished. Just like that, gone. The road twisted and narrowed with every mile until I reached an old gate. Rusted, broken, hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, hidden in the woods, I could see the remains of an abandoned military base, decaying like something out of a nightmare. I cut the engine and stepped out into the cold, my breath fogging in the air. The place was silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. My gut told me to leave, but my feet kept moving, pulling me toward the base. Inside the fence, I found an old radio tower. Its rusted skeleton loomed against the night sky. At the base of the tower stood a small building, just a single room, its door hanging open. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the broken concrete, and that's when I saw it. An old military radio, still running, its dials glowing faintly in the dark. The static from the CB was coming from here, filling the room with the same eerie hum I'd heard on the road. And then from the radio, Eddie's voice again. "Lucas, it's time to stop." The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt something behind me, something watching. I turned, and there he was, Eddie, standing in the doorway, just as he had been the day he died. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, his expression blank. I froze, my heart pounding. "Eddie." He didn't respond, just stared at me, unmoving. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my throat tight. "I should have been there. I should have." Eddie's face twisted. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and suddenly the radio exploded in a burst of static. The air around me felt heavy, pressing down on my chest, and I staggered back, my pulse racing. "Lucas," Eddie's voice rasped from the radio, distorted and wrong. "Stop now." The lights in the building flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When they came back on, Eddie was gone. The radio was silent. I didn't wait for an explanation. I bolted out of the building, ran back to the truck, and tore out of there as fast as I could. The engine roared as I sped down the road. I didn't look back, didn't check the mirrors. I just drove. My name is Gabriel Allen, and back in 2019, I decided to take a much-needed break in the vast expanse of the Yukon Territory's Kluane National Park. As a freelance photographer, I'd spent years chasing deadlines and cityscapes, and I craved the isolation only the wild could offer. So I packed up my RV and set off, eager for a solitary adventure amid glaciers and mountain peaks. The park was everything I hoped for. Towering mountains capped with snow, turquoise lakes reflecting the sky, and an endless horizon that made me feel both insignificant and profoundly alive. I set up camp near a secluded spot by the Duke River, far from the designated camping areas. It was early June, and the days were long, stretching sunlight well into the evening. On my second day, while hiking along a lesser-known trail, I met a fellow traveler named Mark Hastings. He was in his late 40s, with a rugged beard and a friendly demeanor. We bonded over our shared love for the outdoors and decided to fish together that afternoon. As we cast our lines into the clear river, he shared stories of his travels through Canada's wilderness, each tale more adventurous than the last. "Ever been up to the glaciers?" Mark asked, reeling in a catch. "Not yet," I replied, "planning to head that way tomorrow. They say the view is unmatched." He nodded. "Be careful up there. Terrain can be tricky, and weather changes fast. As evening approached, we parted ways. He was heading back to his campsite a few miles upstream, and we made vague plans to meet again. I returned to my RV, cooked a simple meal, and settled in with a book. The silence of the wilderness was a balm to my urban-weary soul. The next morning, I decided to explore the area near the glaciers as planned. The hike was strenuous, but rewarding. The air was crisp, and the landscape shifted from dense forest to rocky inclines dotted with wildflowers. By midday, I reached a vantage point that offered a breathtaking view of the ice fields. While setting up my camera for a panoramic shot, I noticed something unusual through the lens. A flicker of movement far off across the glacier. Zooming in, I saw what looked like a group of people trekking, which was odd given the remoteness of this area. They moved in a staggered line, hauling large backpacks. Curiosity piqued. I decided to get a closer look. As I descended toward the glacier, I stumbled upon a narrow path that seemed to lead in their direction. The trail was marked with fresh footprints and grooves, as if heavy equipment had been dragged through recently. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I brushed it off as overactive imagination. About an hour later, I came across a small makeshift camp tucked into a hollow between ice formations. There were tents camouflaged with white tarps, crates stacked haphazardly, and the faint smell of diesel fuel in the air. Hiding behind a ridge, I observed the scene. Men were unloading containers and carrying them into a crevasse that seemed to open into the glacier itself. Suddenly, a hand clapped on my shoulder. I spun around to face Mark, his expression stern. "What are you doing here?" He whispered harshly. "I could ask you the same," I retorted, confusion mixing with alarm. "You shouldn't be here, Sean. This isn't a place for tourists," he said, his eyes darting nervously back toward the camp. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the camp. A group of men was heading our way, speaking in hushed tones. Mark grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a boulder. "Listen to me carefully," he said urgently. "These people are dangerous. You need to leave now." "Who are they? What's going on?" I demanded. He hesitated before answering. "They're smugglers trafficking illegal goods across the border using the glacier tunnels." My heart raced. "Are you involved in this?" "No," he insisted. "I'm with the RCMP undercover. I've been tracking them for months." The voices grew louder, shadows stretched as the men approached. Mark pressed a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the air. A gunshot. We both ducked instinctively. Chaos erupted as the smugglers scattered, shouting orders in a mix of languages. Mark pulled a handgun from under his jacket. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Before we could move, 2 men rounded the boulder, rifles raised. Mark fired swiftly, hitting one in the shoulder. The other lunged at him, and they grappled fiercely. I watched in stunned disbelief as they fought, the smuggler's knife glinting dangerously. Seizing a rock from the ground, I struck the attacker on the back of the head. He crumpled, and Mark pushed him aside. "Thanks," he muttered. "We have to destroy their stash and call for backup." We made our way toward the camp cautiously. The area was deserted. The smugglers had either fled or were regrouping inside one of the tents. We found crates filled with weapons and packets of white powder, drugs meant for distribution. "Help me with this," Mark said, dousing the crates with gasoline from a nearby canister. We set the camp ablaze, flames licking up toward the sky. The smoke would be a signal, but also a beacon for any remaining smugglers. As we retreated, gunfire erupted again. A bullet whizzed past my ear, and we took cover behind an ice wall. "They're not letting us leave easily," I shouted over the noise. Mark radioed for assistance, but the mountainous terrain interfered with the signal. "We need to get to higher ground." We sprinted toward a ridge, bullets striking the ice around us. Reaching a plateau, Mark tried the radio again. This time, he made contact. "Officer down! Need immediate extraction at Glacier Point," he reported. A helicopter's distant rotor became audible, but the smugglers were closing in. One of them caught up, tackling me to the ground. We struggled, his hands tightening around my throat. Spots danced before my eyes as I gasped for air. Mark intervened, pulling him off me and subduing him with a well-placed blow. Come on, we're almost there. We reached an open area just as the helicopter appeared over the horizon. Relief was short-lived. A group of smugglers stood between us and rescue. Outnumbered and low on options, we prepared to make a stand. Any jokes up your sleeve? I quipped nervously. Not the best time for stand-up comedy, Mark replied grimly. The smugglers advanced, weapons drawn. Suddenly, the helicopter swooped in low and armed officers rappelled down, engaging the criminals in a swift firefight. Within minutes, the smugglers were apprehended or incapacitated. An officer approached us. You guys okay? Better now, Mark responded. As the scene was secured, I sat on a rock, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Bodies were being loaded onto stretchers, some unconscious, others lifeless. The reality of how close I'd come to death settled heavily. Looks like you got more adventure than you bargained for, Mark said, sitting beside me. No kidding, I replied. Next time I want excitement, I'll stick to roller coasters. He chuckled. Probably safer. Back at the base camp, I was debriefed by authorities. They took my statement and advised me to keep the details confidential due to the ongoing investigation. As evening fell, I finally returned to my RV, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. The following day, I decided to leave the park. The allure of solitude had been overshadowed by the stark dangers I had never imagined. Before departing, I did some research at a local library, curious about the operation I had stumbled upon. I discovered that the smuggling ring had ties to a larger criminal network operating along the Canada-US border. They used remote wilderness areas to move contraband, exploiting the challenging terrain to evade law enforcement. Mark Hastings, whose real name was Agent Marcus Hale, had been instrumental in dismantling several such groups. As I drove away from Glen National Park, the majestic mountains in my rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. The open road ahead seemed both inviting and safe, a welcome contrast to the perilous glaciers. In the end, the adventure I had sought had found me in the most unexpected way. I returned to photography with a renewed appreciation for the mundane. As for Agent Hale, he continued his covert work, blending into landscapes where danger lurked beneath the surface. The fog was thicker than I had expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the scent of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest were holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and somewhere out there, hidden within the fog, was the trail I had heard so much about, waiting for me. I had come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps, one that locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, capture its mystery on film, my audience would love it. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and those who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound the crunch of my boots on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was any truth to the rumors. I had always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but that was all they were, stories. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, A stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't resemble any language I knew. I filmed it, speaking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees grew closer together, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely distinguishable from the rest of the forest floor. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply vanished. One moment, there had been a clear path. The next, it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed that I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, alone, in the fog. Okay, I muttered, you've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I had come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for any sign of the trail, but there was nothing. A sense of unease crept in. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate steps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man stared at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. Something about him seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. He was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago was now choked with brambles. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he whispered. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees, thick, twisted trees that looked like they had been there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in around us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind rustling through the leaves, but soon more distinct, voices calling out from the mist. "Nate." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." "The forest," I murmured, trying to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, yet when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside. Water, food, as if someone had packed it just yesterday. A chill ran down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid. his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we took, we always ended up back where we started. The fog pulsed with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he had vanished. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. My GPS was useless, and my camera flickered, displaying distorted footage of things I hadn't seen. Shadows moving between the trees, figures lurking just beyond my sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I could barely see a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers grew louder, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement. Dark figures slipping through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I no longer knew what was real. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the forest's edge, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant blur in my rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I had witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail, the shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was as if he had never existed. I tried to convince myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. That's it for today's tale from Haunting Stories. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, The Haunting Stories thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the haunting awaits your return.